Guys, what's going on? It's Ash here coming at you today in Clash Royale. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. CRL regular season has concluded now, and we are moving into the playoffs. And I have on fantastic caster, and the guy with basically the most knowledge of CRL that I know at least. It's none other than Rich Slaton. He is a commentator for CRL. Rich, welcome to the channel, man. How you doing?
I am fantastic, Ash. Thanks a lot for having me. It's good to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you, dude. And I thought there would be nobody better to fact check my list of the hottest 10 Clash Royale players, not looks-wise, guys, but just who is the hottest right now in the game? Who is the best player as of right now? This is not meant to be a historical list, who's the best of all time. Otherwise, I would include players like Surgical Goblin, who are not going to make the list today, because this is based on, in my opinion, on their performance in CRL, especially how they led their team in these cases to the playoffs. So Rich, I guess what I'd like to do here is get to my list and move from 10 to 1, but before I do that, I have to ask you, man, how have you enjoyed this season so far? Obviously starting out as an avid player, but first time casting. What do you think of the whole thing?
It's been so amazing. I mean, getting to watch these guys play up close. There's something different about seeing these guys live versus seeing them on a stream or seeing them just, playing on their own. The pressure of the lights and the situation they're in really changes a player. And you see some of these guys stepping up so well into that position. And some people, when the bright lights and the pressure is on, they're not the same player. So it's been fascinating watching that. And then just when you put it in this format, when you bring in that it's not just how well do you play a deck that you've played 1,000 matches with, but how deep is your deck pool? How good is your analysis? Like, there's a whole squad behind you, analysts, coaches, managers. So much goes into it, and it's a different level of Clash Royale that's so fun to watch.
Absolutely. And another reason that I have you on, and by the way, you and Andrew have been doing a fantastic job. I've really enjoyed the commentary. In all honesty, I've said that since day one. So keep up the good work moving into the playoffs here. But I guess before I get to my list, my final question to you, I guess, is I wanted to, not to harp on the negative, but I wanted to ask you, what do you think went wrong with three teams like in 30 seconds or less, right? We have, because Misfits, 100 Thieves, and Team Liquid, who missed the playoffs. Team Liquid, obviously a heavy favorite. Misfit and 100 Thieves, just between the two teams, only got 3 wins, I want to say. You can correct me if I'm wrong. But, just thoughts on those three teams. Do you think they can bounce back next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think that all those teams learned a lot about what it's like to be at CRL as opposed to playing an individual game and playing at home. For some of these guys, I think, again, the lights nerf, the being in public like this, you're playing on a set with, there's a crew of 40 people, cameras in your face, teams cheering you on. The pressure's different. So I think that got to some of these guys. I think some people didn't realize the difference between being great at GCs and ladder play versus being great against a team that's preparing to go against you and knows what you do. So I think that's a big part of it. And, the big question this whole season has been, of course, Team Liquid. And those are 4 fantastic players. There's no question about it. They're unbelievable. The team came in my opinion, understaffed. They didn't have an analyst full time until a few weeks into the season. Mm-hmm. And, it takes away from your time to actually practice. The teams that have been really successful, you look at Team Queso, who has a coach, manager, analyst, and a team psychologist.
Psychologist, I was going to say, yeah, I know, yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So you have this huge support staff behind them. And I firmly believe that if Team Liquid, if you put Surgical Goblin, Diego B, Buffmac, and Azealis with a staff behind them to give them the proper support, there's no question of them being in the playoffs.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. And shout out to Führer, too, who works Team Queso. And he's one of the most impressive guys I've met as far as managers go in the game. But, Rich, let's get to the actual list. I agree with you, though. I'm expecting, especially Team Liquid, if they keep that core roster, I would put my YouTube channel on them making the playoffs next year. So we'll see. I hope.
They're great guys and they're great players, and this was just there were challenges they dealt with that I think next year they won't have to deal with those challenges.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna get to my list now. A quick last caveat on my list here is that I have not seen any Latin America, and it's an abbreviated season, I think, or it's all crammed into a little area, and they just kind of started, so I didn't include any Latin American players, even though my personal favorites are Wen and Surgical TS from Pain Esports, or Pain Sports. But with that said, let's get to the list. And number 10, I put Elsiop, and I know that you are the absolute guru when it comes to NA and EU, but you probably spend so much time analyzing the those two regions that you probably don't watch a ton of CRL China and Asia, I imagine.
Well, I'll be doing a lot of my homework coming up to Worlds in Japan, so
Sure.
Don't you worry. I have a feeling I'll be watching a lot of LCOP's work between now and then.
Yeah, for sure. And he's an amazing player, and he actually came on really strong at the very end. I think he won MVP at the very end of the season, but he did struggle a little bit after the Asian games, and he took, I think, a week or two off. So that's why I have him so low on my list, but there's no doubt about it. He's definitely one of the most feared players, I think, in all of the entire world. Number 9 on my list is going to be OP Sam. I'm sure not a lot of people are expecting for him to make the list, but I've been really impressed with him. What do you have to say about Sam?
Well, the big thing for Sam that people don't realize is the deck building. Of course, there's the OP Sam deck that went meta a few weeks ago when he hit top on the ladder with it, and then, of course, swept at CRL. But people don't realize that he's been gone from the season most of the time. And Vulcan, who's one of the best in the world, who's been impressive like crazy, admitted to me that Sam's been building their decks all season in both 2v2 and 1v1. So to me, that he's a mad scientist. That's what I call him on the show. He reminds me of a young Doc Brown from Back to the Future. And he's always got... The thing with him is that you never know what a deck's going to look like. He can put 2 or 3 cards out, and you think you got him nailed down, and he makes a switch that isn't just effective, that doesn't just make sense, but it ends up being effective.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. Out of all the players on this list, I do think that, at least from what I've seen, he comes up with the most out-of-the-box stuff. And I do agree, too, that deck construction is an underrated and often underappreciated talent. So that's why Sam makes number 9 on my list. Number 8 is going to be, from Cloud9, Wingz. What do you think about Wingz, Rich? Would he be in your top 10?
Yeah, definitely. Wingz, I mean, I think he's a major reason, of course, why Cloud9 made the playoffs in the first place. He's 11-3 in King of the Hill, which is such a crazy high-pressure situation.
It's insane.
And it's insanely high pressure. And also, Wingz is someone who the pressure does, like, he feels it, and he still plays through that pressure. And there's a lot of guys who really thrive under that and don't feel it a lot, but you can see it. You watch him, and it really stresses him out, and he still stays so focused and plays at such a high level. So, yeah, I think there's no question. And if you look at the resume of people he's taken down, Wingz belongs in the conversation for top 10, no question.
Absolutely. And when I think Wingz, I think of, first of all, like a quieter kid who, oftentimes doesn't show a ton of emotion, but he's always been so solid in my mind, like he's a guy that I would always feel comfortable throwing out there. And it was really tough. This list was so tough, Rich, man. Like you could include like Baron or C. McHugh. You could include half these rosters on the top 10, but I'm going to
talk about what they're doing this season.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the other thing about Wingz is to put stuff on his, talk about resume for stuff for this year. He swept Royal in 1v1 to keep Cloud9 in the playoffs. He also swept Colton and Razor in 2v2. So you're talking about the best players in their sets. He's taken them down.
He can take down the best. Yeah, that's why he definitely makes the list. And moving on the list, number 7, I have Soaking from Team Queso. Obviously one of the OG Team Queso guys. The rest of the team, well, I guess a few of their guys have been there for a while, but a lot of their other big name players have since moved on. They picked up some really great players as well, like St. Bellican as well. But Soaking's been a guy who stood out to me as another really, really solid player with a pretty good win percentage as well. What do you think of Soaking so far?
Well, I think one of the things that sets him apart from the other veterans in CRL is that he, I think, has tried to innovate more. A lot of veterans have kind of laid back to a certain degree on their pedigree or on decks that they know they play very well, but he's really tried to stay on the cutting edge all season. So you watch some of the stuff he's done, and you almost have to laugh at how amazing it's been. So some of those big wins, especially that 1v1 set he had over Team Liquid for the sweep that put them over the edge, like the 1v1 sweep over Surgical. If you watch that set, Soaking did some things in there where you're like, I didn't expect him to do that and to stay this far ahead of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. He's a really, really fun player to watch, and I do agree with you that he has like some sort of a psychological voodoo curse that he can use as in a back pocket if he needs it. But number 6 on my list is going to be one of my personal favorite players, Rich, is Vulcan. And I think that Vulcan, I put him on my list because he is fundamentally just so sound, and I rarely see him make mistakes. He seems like one of those guys who is incredibly cool and calm under the big bright lights, under the pressure situation. What do you think of Vulcan, having watched him all season?
I mean, that's absolutely true. If it weren't for sort of the run that Royals gone in the second half of the season, Vulcan would easily be a candidate for me to be number one in North America. But again, it's not just that he's mechanically sound, because that's absolutely true. Like, there's so few times he makes a mistake, but it's also that he doesn't get flustered when he falls behind. Like, he knows he can make the correct moves to put himself back in the game. And again, when you put him, when you pair that with the deck building of the genius OP Sam, that's why, even with the struggles they had, only having 3 players for most of the season, that TSM's still in the playoffs.
Absolutely, because Sam came on, a little bit late, like you said. So Vulcan really, for early on, I'm not going to lie, their roster has really kind of fallen into a real nice sweet spot recently. Like, all the players have been playing a lot better. But early on, there was no doubt about it. I thought that Vulcan was carrying the team. But it's really nice that the team kind of stepped it up later on the season, at least from my point of view. And getting into the top 5 here, is there anybody in the bottom? I guess you don't know until I say the top 5, right? I was going to say, is there anybody you disagree with? But so far, we seem to be pretty much on the same page. And top 5, number 5 is Kuchiku from Team Queso. What do you think of Kuchiku?
Kuchiku's he's absolutely legit. And you take a look at him, it's interesting. You look at some of these records of who stepped up. Sometimes it's not always the player you expect for a team. So everyone expects Soking to be the true carry for Team Queso. But if you look at Kuchiku,
which they've both been great, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, I mean, everyone's been great, and that's why it's so hard to pick anyone specifically out of Team Queso, because they're able to rotate their roster so much. Everyone can do everything well. But Kuchiku, I think that putting him above Soking for this season is a legit call. He's undefeated in sets, 4-0 in 2v2, 4-0 in 1v1. And then what he did, he only lost 2 or 3 total games all season between 2v2, 1v1, and King of the Hill.
That is insane, and you hit the nail on the head, Rich, when it comes to looking at their roster, Team Queso's roster going into the season. I'll admit that I predicted them to do well, but not as well as they did. And I would not have put Kuchiku as their top 2 player. I would have definitely taken Soking and Belican. And like you said, they've all done great, and Soking made my list as well. But man, Kuchiku has been dominant. So that's why he comes in at the 5 spot. Now, number 4 is going to be a player from Asia. And this was another difficult one for me. It's going to be Mikin Booya, a.k.a. Orange Boy, who is really my favorite player to watch in Japan, so it might be putting a little bit of my own. Well, he's really, really good too, so I guess it's not just my biases on it. But there's no doubt about it, his team, Ponos, has the most, in my opinion, the most stacked team by far in Asia. They have Tengod, they have Rolla Perone, and Mikin Booya, who really all could have made the list. They also have Fuchi, who's an amazing player. He made it to the CCGS World Finals last year. And they also have Reiki Jones. That is an incredible top 5. But Mikin Booya, to me, is the heart and soul of that team, and he's one of their most skilled players. So that's why I put him on my list. Have you seen him at all play, Rich?
Very little, but I'll tell you this from the green room backstage, talking with the players from NA and EU. We talk about what's happening throughout the world, and the team they're afraid of out of Asia is Ponos, and there's a reason why.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible. And another guy, kind of giving a nod to somebody who's not on my list, is that I considered putting the list, is Expo Master, aka Sin Woong. But the reason I didn't put him on the list is because, like I said in the beginning of the video, is that even though he's a great player, there's no doubt about it, his team is making the playoffs, but they're making the playoffs with a losing record. And Korea has really struggled in CRL Asia. So for that reason, I didn't put him on my list. But moving into top 3, I'm going to go with another CRL, not Asia, China player, which is in Asia, but a CRL China player, and it's Aurora, aka AU. They just announced today, actually, at the time of this recording, yesterday at the time that it goes live, that AU was the MVP of all of CRL China. And that's another one, kind of like Kuchiku, Rich, where if you look at Nova's roster, it is unbelievably stacked, right? They have LCOP, they have AU, they have Legend, they have Sergio Ramos. They could fly in Carnage. He is technically under their roster. I said Legend. They have Little Chen. They have LCOP. I'm probably forgetting somebody else, but they have an embarrassment of riches. But AU was the player who I probably would have put him, in all fairness, maybe like fourth most skilled player on the team going into the season, but he's been the absolute workhorse. He's been dominant in 1v1s, just really solid in 2v2s. So that's why AU makes my list at number 3. And then Rich, man, we had a little. I told you my number 1 before we hit record, and we had a little disagreement here between 1 and 2 on the list. So I'll tell the 2 players, and then we can talk about maybe comparing the 2 players. And they're both from Well, one's from EU, one's from NA, and it is, even though they're both from EU in real life. And number 2 on my list is Royal, and number 1 is Canario. But you had them flip-flopped, and you said that you think that Royal was, without a doubt, the best player in the world right now. So let's talk about these 2 power horses. There's no doubt about it. They're both incredible, Royal and Canario. So talk about both of the players a little bit, Rich, from your experience, and what are their strengths, and do they even have any weaknesses?
Yeah, I mean, that's the weaknesses, I guess, is the really hard question to ask with both these guys. Mm-hmm. I think that Canario is without question the most technically sound player in CRL. Like, if you take a look at how many times he actually makes a mistake, it's so rare. He's keeping track, like trying to blot everything else out while you're playing, even when you're just playing at home by yourself, is difficult. And in the situation he's in, like, he knows exactly what your elixir's at, exactly where your cycle's at. He knows exactly what you have planned. He's almost sort of, I mean, I've said this about Vulcan being sort of a psychic predictor, but same thing with Canario, where it's almost like he sees the end of the game before you see the end of the game. So you look at like the big time positions he's come in and the big plays he's made. Like, he swept Queso in King of the Hill. Queso hasn't lost Queso lost twice, and one of those reasons is Canario. Yeah. So I mean, took out Surge, took out Diego, took out Azealis, took out IMJP when IMJP was like still on a pretty big hot streak.
Another player who I could have included on the list, and maybe I should have. I don't know, but go on. Yeah.
Yeah, JP had a rough second half of the season, but he's one of those guys who, like, even if you tied 2 hands behind his back, he's still dangerous to play against.
Absolutely.
But Canario, obviously from his record, he went 11-2 overall in sets this season, not to mention 8-4 in King of the Hill. Yeah, he was totally on fire, and it's because he's unbelievably technically sound. Mm-hmm. But I just don't think there's an argument right now that Royal isn't the best player in the world. I don't agree with anybody who says anything different, and there's a couple reasons. One, you couple what he's done here at CRL, going 10-3 in overall sets, going 24-12 overall in his win rate, 24-10 head-to-head, but also give him that second place finish on the ladder on this last season. Yeah. Right now, he's on fire. And the big reason with him, and this is why I put him above Canario from a pure play standpoint, is that Canario is methodical like crazy. Like, Canario does everything measured and paced. Mm-hmm. You don't know what style Royal's going to play. I'm not talking deck. What style he's going to play game by game. He might pressure you hard with a deck that you think wouldn't pressure, and he might pull back in a situation where you think you wouldn't. And it always seems to work for him. My big thing, some people are going to say this is kind of a basic move, but you have to understand the situation it was in, and it's a video that you're probably going to be showing at some point during this. It's Royal, I think it's his match against Adrian Piedra, game number 3 against Complexity, which was basically a match to see who would get first and get a first and second round bye for playoffs. He opened up in the first 30 seconds pushing Golem at the river in the left-hand lane because he put his opponent on 3 Musketeers Royal Hogs, baited the Royal Hogs out, and dropped the Fire Spirits on him and wiped out the push entirely. Amazing. And that was it was a brilliant play. And you might say, yeah, that's a play anyone can make. But make that in this situation. Have the guts to make that play in this moment, and that's what makes a pro different from a guy playing at home.
Absolutely. And you know what? You're right. And Royal is, I mean, It's certainly so tough to compare the two players, or really any of these players. This is just our silly list, and there's been so many great performances, But I find it hard to disagree with any argument you can make for either of those two players. So I'm going to go ahead and agree with you and say that Royal might have those power and unpredictability in his favor, and then agreed too that Canario is definitely the most technically sound player in EU and maybe even the entire world. So that is my list. Rich, are there any big names that I left out that would definitely make your list?
I have two names. Yeah. I have two names that at least deserve an honorable mention, one of which I think belongs on the list, and that's, in my opinion, Razor. And I know that the reason why he's not on the list is sort of an anti-2v2 bias that comes out there. And I get it. It's new, and mechanically it's different. And that's the reality, is it's not the same mechanical game that 1v1 is. But there's a reason why complexity is in this position. It's because Carter and Razor went 2 months early to work out at the Complexity Training Center in Texas, and spent 2 months becoming the best in the world at 2v2. Mm-hmm. And that paid off. They went 10-3 overall in sets, 22-8 with one draw. And tell me that there's not a skill set that plays there when those guys put the work in and it paid off. And it's different. It's about communication. It's about understanding how your opponent plays. It's about knowing, or how your teammate plays. It's about knowing when you step into the leadership role versus your opponent steps in the leadership role. It's a different game, but you combine that with what he did in King of the Hill, opening up with 2 sweeps, and to me, Razor belongs in the top 10 conversation.
Absolutely. The whole Complexity team, and you're totally right, by the way, and that's one of the reasons I had you on too, is because I am ignorant when it comes to 2v2. Not because I'm a 2v2 hater in competitive Clash Royale, but honestly, from a viewer, to my untrained eye, it's very hard to pick up the kind of the minutia, the really micro strategy involved. I'm sure you, as a caster and analyst, you definitely know what you're looking at, and you can actually pick up on these things before the layman like me can. So I'm definitely not up to date with who's the best 2v2. But you did mention that, last question for you, Rich, is you did mention that there was Razor was sort of a pioneer, and Carter as well, in 2v2. What did they do that separated them in 2v2? Was there one strategic move, or was it just a collection of things?
Well, Razor and Colton, I think first was they really figured out how to get that communication down. I think one thing that would make 2v2 easier for viewers to follow along with is, when you're watching a MOBA, you get to hear the comm chat sometimes. If you hear the way these players are talking to each other, if you listen to AC and the God RF, the way that they work together. It's also, when you get to hear that, it's actually a really beautiful thing to see the synergy. So there's some of that. I think that Razor and Colton also, they didn't stay behind. A lot of the meta became early on in the season that double golem beatdown meta, and they were continuously trying to push forward and look for what's next, and trying to stay ahead of the balance updates that did affect our competitive play as well. And then you look in their later in the season, I think in their 13th or 14th match against Immortals, the biggest match of the season, they're suddenly throwing Goblin Giant into a 2v2 set, which no one was doing.
Yeah.
So and they win with that. So I'm looking at them both from getting ahead of the game, learning their teamwork, from staying ahead of the meta with deck building. Those two things I think really set them aside.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And I do like the one thing I do like about 2v2 is how it's a different meta. It's kind of refreshing in a way, seeing those giant skeletons here and there, or the goblin giant, stuff like that you'd never really see, or very seldom see, I should say, in 1v1 is pretty cool. Giant snowball, another card. But I guess that's going to do it for this video. We've gone over my top 10, and guys, feel free, my viewers, to correct me on all the players I missed or all the reasons I'm wrong. Just my opinion, as always. But I want to give a huge shout out again to Rich Slaton. You can check out his Twitter information. Anything else that we need to know about you, Rich?
At Rich Slaton. I'll be coming out with some of my own stuff pretty soon.
Looking forward to that.
Yeah, if you can find a bunch of stuff on me. I've been a comedian for a long time. I've been a mixed martial arts commentator, and I've loved Clash Royale for a while, and it's an honor to be able to be a part of it at this level.
Well, it's an honor to have you. We're very lucky to have such a dedicated caster. So thanks again for coming on, man. We'll have to have you soon. Maybe we can do a World Finals preview after the playoffs kind of conclude. So
yeah, well, you got to get Andrew in here. He is
yeah.
I got to give a shout out to my co-host Andrew Guy, who really he's first of all, he's the better player. I'll admit that publicly right now. He definitely whoops me around the arena here and there. But he also is exceptionally knowledgeable, and it's been like working with him to put together the best show we can has been fantastic.
I'm thinking maybe a caster versus caster series here on the channel.
Oh God, don't embarrass me like that.
We'll get Chiz in, we'll get you guys. It'll be fun. But hey, Rich, thanks again for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
No problem. Guys, that is going to do it for today's video. Check out Rich's social media and information in the description below. And, of course, my YouTube partner, Bren Chong's information as well. Guys, thank you so much for watching. And, as always, take care, guys.